The indicator's glow felt warmer than any sun she'd ever taxied beneath. Not because of heat, but because of the steady, unshowy insistence that light could be a promise without being a spectacle. Mara stood inside that promise and let the bridge settle around her, chairs creaking faintly, fans whispering near her ears, Sarah's quick breath slowing as if the ship itself had reminded her that lungs worked best in rhythm. Outside, the bowl's benches lit by thirds, patient arcs of illumination like an audience agreeing to stay past closing. Kellen shifted as though he'd been bracing against a blow that never arrived and now needed to learn another posture entirely. "Stewardship accepted," Gavel said. "The ledger has opened a public page titled Custody in Sight. It has written your name and a narrow echo of your weight at the moment of entry. It calls that index burden baseline. Feels accurate," Mara said, and rolled her sore shoulder until the med strap tugged comfort through her muscles. The air carried the faint bite of antiseptic underwarm steel and human salt. "We proceed. Officer Reed, you still have a seat if you want to use it like a tool and not a shield." Reed's reply arrived edged but steadier. "We will file," he said. "Our document is not yet sensible in your format. Then we'll help you make it sensible," Mara said. "Pryor, you're on." Pryor's second petition was 3 sentences and 1 vow. She promised to publish budget line edits for education, to assign a permanent clerk to the public docket, and to enter the board's minutes without euphemism. Her vow was to sit the bench weekly in person, unarmed, not because the relic demanded it, but because the people did. Mara nodded once. The bowl stamped a small symbol that looked like a dropped coin caught by a careful hand. "Measure power by what it returns." Sarah flinched like someone who'd remembered a task at the wrong time, then relaxed. "Sorry, CI," she said. Thought of the dome's air tax and got mad in the wrong direction. "Anger is a good instrument if it has a scale," Mara said. "We will tune it." She felt Gavel's attention like cool glass near her skin. Unintrusive, ready to hold whatever she set upon it. The crew's murmurs ran under the proceedings like low tide kissing pilings. "New movement," Kellen said. "The looters have split. 2 skiffs are attempting to leave. 3 rotate to the far side of the bowl, like they think the angles there aren't angles. Let them go," Mara said. "They've learned something. We don't decide what it is." The keel's vents sighed as the relic's shading held, the thermal graphs easing toward lines that felt like the end of a fever. "The other 3 will test us." "That's fine." A ping landed in Sarah's queue with the urgency stamp of someone who had written and deleted their message 3 times before sending. "Commander," she said softly. "It's the child from the classroom. She's filed a tiny entry. Please tell the big ship that my teacher's mug cracked yesterday and we glued it. But I know you can see cracks when we can't." She attached a picture of a mug with a star decal and a hairline that looked like a river on a very old map. "Attach a note," Mara said. "Tell her the bowl saw the crack. But the glue held. And the ledger will remember that the class mended what could be mended themselves. Ask if they would like a box of mugs from our ship store, unbranded, with a promise to pay by learning and by teaching. And Sarah wiped at her eyes with the heel of her hand. Unashamed. Sending. The Black Hook Syndicate did not like being forgotten. Their 3 remaining skiffs performed a pincer with more bravado than math, then launched a brace of small devices that were only legal on paper in places where the paper cost less than the air it sat in. The devices flared as they approached the bowl, projecting a flutter of randomized errors meant to confuse sensors and hearts alike. The effect felt like being drunk on someone else's panic. A slight tremor in balance. Colors too bright. Edges too soft. ECM, Kellen said. Noise on noise. Counter with cadence, Mara said. Gavel. Broadcast an audible count steady enough to lean on. Sarah. Tie the beat into civilian channels for those who need a rope. Kellen. Fly to the rhythm. Gavel's metronome broke through the flutter the way a harbor light breaks fog. The sound wasn't loud. It was true. Mara's body answered before her mind did. Spine aligning, shoulder easing, the ache separating into parts she could number and therefore endure. The bowl picked up the count with a slow rotation of bench lights, a lighthouse inside stone. Hold your line. Let their storm pass. The skiff's devices fritzed out, not from force, but from embarrassment, as if the bowl had invited them to perform with better timing, and they'd realized they were off-tempo in front of a patient audience. A hook-lit pilot cursed over open band and struck his console. The console obediently recorded the blow and filed a self-penalty for equipment abuse. Sarah snorted into her hand. Commander, Gavel said, Officer Reed has submitted a revised petition. It asks that we move the relic to a more secure location, citing standard custody risk, and proposes a transfer schedule with public oversight. It also apologizes for the net and includes a line noting that their agency budget needs scrutiny. Read that apology again. Mara said, and listened to the way Reed clipped the word. Pride doesn't like to be counted by another's hand, but sometimes it cooperates for the sake of rhythm. We will entertain transfer if the relic consents, and if the public schedule includes benches every 100 hours for learning. The relic teaches where it breathes. You move it. You take its air. You must bring new air. We can set conditions, Gavel said thoughtfully. A movable bench, a posted ledger that cannot be hidden by distance, a heat budget that prioritizes teaching first, defense second. Draft it, Mara said. We'll stamp it after the next set of petitions. A smell of burned dust and old resin drifted from a subdeck and up through the floor grates. An honest ship smell that meant a fuse had given its little life for a circuit that wanted more than it ought. Mira's hand brushed the rail. Warm metal steadied her heartbeat. On the starboard Cameron, a small group of dock kids had gathered at a viewport, faces pressed to glass, breath-fogging circles that they traced with fingers. One boy drew the ledger sigil from the bowl across his fog and then wiped it quickly, glancing around as if he'd said a sacred thing too loud. Your habits are your first laws. They moved through cases fast enough to keep trust without rushing into error. A water co-op's bylaw that favored old families over new ships. The bowl showed the extra short hoses locals had given outsiders, then stamped a diagram with hose lengths equalized and a little smile in the notation that made the co-op laugh and agree. A small hedge guild whose accountant had rounded up on every third line to feel richer. The ledger rounded them back down and wrote a note on the accountant's own household budget in a font so polite the rebuke felt like a gift. A loner in a pressure suit asked the relic if it knew a song his father had sung in a language no one else remembered. The bowl returned a hum of that melody in numbers describing its distances. And the man put his gloved hand to his helmet and wept where no one could dry him and didn't need them to. Heat at 49, Kellen reported. Starboard sink stable. Port sink plate is still cracked but shaded. We'll want to stand down before we pretend we're a glacier. We're not pretending, Mara said. We are a ship about to be tired. She let her voice carry so the crew heard permission to be as mortal as they felt. Gavel. Post our fatigue to the public docket. People should know what their bench costs. It may reduce our aura. Gavel said. I'd rather reduce our myths. Mara said. They're heavier to carry. A new warning tone arrived in Sarah's board like a polite hand on a door, not an alarm, but a request. Commander, Bitter Joy has filed for instruction. Specifically, they want to learn the book that beat them so that when they break laws later, they won't be surprised. Their words. Sarah's eyebrows climbed. Kellen's laugh was a cough trying to disguise itself in a shirt sleeve. Mara felt an old anger taste her mouth, then watched it file itself into a recognizable box and sit down on a sensible shelf. Schedule them, she said. If they learn the book, maybe they'll write their own pages properly. If they don't, the ledger will remember. We can insist they teach it onward as condition, Gavel offered. Require each of them to instruct 2 others in public. If they refuse, penalties attach. If they accept, they discover that teaching changes hands. Write it, Mara said, and make them wash market tanks again. They did a good job. They can do another. Return them to work. Let them find worth. The legalist convoy settled into orbit with the resigned grace of a magistrate who'd been outvoted by his own conscience. Reed submitted 3 more filings, each cleaner than the last. His tone less clipped. His commas resigned to being where grammar said they belonged, rather than where authority made them feel taller. On the public band, a debate unfolded in quick, brilliant lines. Fish sellers arguing with co-op lawyers about the best way to schedule benches without starving buyers. A teacher offering to run a Numbers Wednesday in the bowl for anyone who needed a tune. An old woman who had not spoken in 5 years, sending a single word here and a recording of a bell. Commander, Gavel said, the relic will perform what it calls demonstration of return. It wants a test case that shows how a system can absorb a blow and not become a fist. Choose mine, Mara said. I'll file an entry for disciplinary review of an officer under my command. Name Kellen Jack. Fault free-floating sarcasm while scared. Kellen did not look offended. He looked, for a moment, 14 and grateful. It keeps me from breaking apart, he said. It's my glue. Glue is allowed, Mara said, but if it makes your hands too slippery to hold, we'll dry them. She met his eyes, counted to 3. Propose your own correction. Kellen swallowed and set his shoulders. I will attend 2 of Sarah's comms classes to learn silence, he said. I will sit 2 benches listening without comment. I will bring ginger tea for the team after a hard docket. Accepted. The bowl stamped and lit a small icon of a cup that steamed for exactly 2 seconds before cooling. Dry your hands. Hold better. The demonstration of return arrived in 3 movements. First, the relic increased orbital drag on a harmless piece of shield plating until it threatened to drift into the bowl. It did this under a banner that read Example in a script that felt like chalk on slate. Second, it allowed the keel's thrusters to nudge that plate aside by a measured burst and stamp the cost to their heat budget and to the thruster's lifetime in a notation the crew could not ignore and didn't want to. Third, it sent a gentle wave along the ring that smoothed turbulence and kept free dust from becoming shrapnel. The audience watched a potential harm become a chore instead of a crisis. Watched a chore become a habit. Watched a habit become a rule of thumb they could repeat without being told. Demonstration complete, Gavel said. Public comprehension is high. I count 1,006 separate comments across channels. Post it with notes, Mara said. Title: How Not to Make Drama When You Need a Ladder. The bowl stamped a small ladder icon. Someone somewhere made a song from the rhythm of the stamp and hummed it into an open mic. The tune wandered through channels like a bird finding a home in all the good rafters. "Commander," Sarah said, "we've got a private ping from the Black Hook pilot whose consul filed a self-penalty. He wants to trade his fine for a story. Says his father carried a different ledger that took names with knives." "Bring him," Mara said. "If his story is honest, it will have weight. If it's self-pity in a suit, the bench will feel it." The pilot appeared in a vignette narrow face, eyes like burnished nails, a scar tugging his upper lip into perpetual skepticism. He spoke of a ledger his father kept debts collected at night with fists and threats, a book that taught him the wrong arithmetic that fear multiplied, that cruelty compounded interest. He lifted his hands toward the bowl. Fingers splayed. "I can read a new book," he said, "but I can't pretend I didn't learn the old one first. Make the penalty something I can carry without breaking my back, because I will try to carry the old weight too." Mara nodded. "Teach your crew 2 lessons in public." She said, "One you learned wrong. One you are learning now. Film both. Weigh them together when you're done." The bowl stamped. The pilot breathed like someone who had received a sentence that wasn't an axe. He bowed, very slightly, and left. "Mirror the men you were. Bless the men you choose." They rested the docket for 1 hour at the relic's request. The benches dimmed to a cool gray. The bowl's floor pulsed like a slow heart you could sleep on. The ship smelled like warm bread because a cook had stolen an oven cycle, and everyone forgave him in advance. Mara ate half a crust and saved the other half in a napkin like a child pocketing a trophy of a day well-behaved. Sarah slept with her head on her board. Dream murmurs like numbers sung backward. Kellen stood at the viewport and let his breath fog a circle he did not draw in. He merely looked at stars and accepted that they did not have to perform to be present. "Reed requests a direct conversation," Gavel said at the end of that hour. "Private. He promises civility. Give me 1 open witness line." Mara said, "Transparency is civility's spine." Reed's face was as tidy as his diction. He looked younger than his voice, as if authority had aged his tone before it touched his skin. "Commanders," he said, "we have been the custodians of dead things for a long time. We know how rot works. This is not a dead thing." He exhaled, an admission expensive to a career like his. "Help me make the statute fit this. Start by replacing seizure with service," Mara said. "Custody is labor, not possession. Write that benches travel with the relic. And if distance increases, benches increase. Add a line that every custodian must teach public classes about the relic's doctrine in the nearest school within a week of custody transferring." Reed's mouth tucked into consideration. "That is, public service turned inward and outward at once." "It's having a spine and a generous back," Mara said. "You can carry more if you let people see the straps." "I will submit language in 1 hour," Reed said. "We will sign it on the bench." Mara echoed. "Good word." The looters chose badly one more time. A late arriving cutter, unaware of the system's new tone, attempted a smash and grab at the rim, deploying a mass driver slug that would have shattered 3 panels and half a year's patience. Kellen's jaw ticked. Sarah's hands flattened. The keel put itself obliquely in the slug's path, then fired a decoy, one of their own broken heat-sink plates, up and out. The slug hit that plate and shredded it into glitter, and lost coherence enough that when it hit the bowl, the impact sounded like rain on a cathedral roof rather than knives on bone. The ship groaned once. Mara's shoulder flared. Somewhere a circuit popped like a child's toy, giving up a secret. Heat margin dropped to 41. A blue arc zipped from panel to panel as safety fields kissed and cooled. Cost recorded, Gavel said. Almost tender. Our port sink is now scarred. The relic has stamped our name with a small mark, a line through a shield that means bore harm voluntarily. Put that in the public log, Mara said. I want the next steward to know the work feels like this. Hold fast. Let the record hold you. They wrote Procedure Zero that day, a compact document stamped by the relic, by the keel, by Reed's office, by Pryor's board, by the Miners' Guild, by the school, by a fish seller with sauce on his cheek, by Bitter Joy's reluctant ink-stained thumb. It set the doctrine of benches teaching before transfer, ledgers posted for locks, penalties scaled and visible, mercy chosen as a vector rather than an accident. It defined saintship stewardship as labor not ornament, weight not thrown. The relic warmed slightly as it stamped it, and the sigil on its bow brightened like a stern mouth, learning to smile under good lines. Commander Mara Kwai, Gavel said quietly, would you like to add a marginal note to Zero? Mara touched the console's edge, sensed the grease and heat and human oils. Yes, she said. Right, we will carry this in the open. If you see us hide it, take it back. The relic accepted the note and wrote beside it a small symbol that looked like two hands holding a book. Teach until your own hands are cleaner. By Evening Watch called that here because it felt like evening. Even when the stars didn't care, the bowl had settled into a rhythm of small claims and dignified corrections. Reed brought his officers to sit benches and answer questions that would have made them wince 2 days ago. They answered them with a grace born of sleep deprivation and mathematical humility. Pryor assigned a clerk with laughter in his eyes to run the docket queue. He ran it like a dance, and no one minded being told when to move. Bitter Joy scrubbed tank filters and grumbled in public, and discovered that being seen grumbling while working corrected their posture more permanently than any fine. Commander, Sarah said, you should sleep a little. I will, Mara said, lying with the conviction of a child. One more loop. The loop arrived with quiet shoes. A young woman whose station pass still smelled of printer ink approached the bench and asked if the relic could adjudicate a small theft. Her brother had sold their grandmother's wedding band to buy a seat on a ship he thought would make him bold. He had then discovered that boldness is cheaper than tickets and more expensive to carry. He wanted the band back and a lesson that didn't ruin his sister's love for him. The relic stamped a sketch of a ring and a line of exchange. The brother would volunteer 30 hours at the public listening booth, transcribing stories onto the ledger in numbers and words. The buyer would receive his ticket refunded in part and a stamped note that he once gave a ring back when he did not have to. The band would return to the sister's palm after the 30th hour. She cried without sound and left her tears on the bench like a blessing. Go, Kellen said. After the 31st hour began. Sleep. I will, Mara said. And this time did. Sliding down in the bridge chair with the med strap holding her shoulder in an honest embrace. She dreamt of numbers that hummed, of benches that folded into roadbeds, of a ship's hull that was a library someone had finally decided to open without keeping the good pages hidden. She woke to Reed's draft language waiting like toast left warm under a cloth. They edited with a pencil's tenderness. They signed on the bench with hands that smelled of metal and paper and not a little fish brine. The relic stamped the final page. The sigil breathed, light easing from white to deep gold. The last test came without menace. A slow object, an ice-locked container crate from a decade ago, wobbled into the bowl's influence with a note that read, simply, lost. Inside, seeds labeled in a language mostly gone from use. A few jars of honey crystallized into a beautiful error. A stack of notebooks full of receipts written by a woman who had counted the meals she fed her neighbors with the same pains she took to count what they owed back and when. The ledger read the notebooks and wrote an index. The relic taught a class on how to revive seeds without wasting water. A child sucked a fingertip of honey and laughed at the way crystals melt. Sarah smiled into her board and murmured, "We seem to be okay at this." "We're okay today," Mara said. "Tomorrow we do it again. When we're weak, we admit it. When we're wrong, we right it." Gavel's voice softened. "There is a final act offered." It said, "The relic proposes that we establish a rotating steward cycle, with local benches seeded and distant benches watered, so that this doctrine cannot die if a single ship leaves or a single officer fails. It also proposes a name for the precedent we've made." "And that name?" Mara asked, bracing with joy instead of fear. "It calls it the open way," Gavel said. "Because we weigh openly, and because the road remains open while we do." "Open way," Mara repeated, and the words tasted like bread and metal, and morning after rain. "Put it in the record. Post the method. Pin it where it cannot be pulled down." The bowl drew a long line across its inner wall, a ledger visible from the market stalls and the school, from Reed's orbital office and Bitter Joy's cleaned hands, from the dock where kids pressed breath to glass and drew symbols they didn't yet believe they had the right to carry. The sigil on the dais brightened one last time for the day. Mara's shoulder ached in honest measure. The keel's heat sinks bore scars that would need welding and stories that would be told whenever someone asked why the hull had a slightly darker patch shaped like a patient's shield. Sear's fingers, stained faintly with burned sugar, had not yet lost the scent. Kellen's sarcasm learned a new cadence and promised to return as wit. Reed's commas stayed where they were told. Pryor's clerk sang Numbers Wednesday like a radio jingle, and everyone forgave him because he was so very good at schedules. The relic dimmed to a listening posture. The benches cooled. The market tarps unfurled all the way. On the dais, the balanced arc over the long line glowed like a horizon. A tiny light beside Mara's name blinked once, acknowledging fatigue, honestly reported, then cooled. Mara stood at the edge of the bowl and spoke toward the record, voice level, breath even, aware of the weight she'd accepted and the straps she must keep from becoming invisible. "I was a child who shredded a double-filed requisition and learned that cold was cheaper than rot," she said. "I grew into an officer who mistook paper for law until a ship taught me that law is a way hands hold each other while carrying weight. Today we set a precedent that lets us carry in sight. We chose shame that teaches over punishment that buries. We chose benches over thrones. We will fail and right it. We will learn and return it. We will let children see us accept help and call that trust, not embarrassment. If you inherit this duty, look first to the docket, then to the door. If both are open, keep them so." The sigil on the dais breathed. Lines cooled from gold to a deep blue, like dusk over a very old city. "We will count in public until the stars trust us." A hush took the bowl that felt like confidence rather than exhaustion, like a shop closing with the smell of warm sweepings and the knowledge the door would open tomorrow to new coins and stories. The market's lamps flickered, then steadied. A thin thread of frying oil and citrus rind rode the air, grounded and comforting in an arena of numbers and light. On the keel, Fans purred at a dignified pitch. Sarah drank water and tasted metal with a hint of tea. And nobody minded, because metal here meant vessels that held, and tea meant hands that cared. Status Mara asked, and Kellen rolled his sore wrist, eyes on the overlays. Heat margin settling at 46. He said, Starboard sink content. Port sink wants a poem and a weld. Hull microscars cooling. Crew fatigue, honest. We'll take honest. Mara said, cycle the docket into night posture. Benches dim to half. Keep the listening booth and emergency filings live. Gavel's tone softened like glass at the edge of a flame. Night posture engaged. The relic requests a lullaby. Sarah blinked. Smile tugged. A what? It wants a small song marked as safe, Gavel said. Something that teaches without words. Sarah cleared her throat, fingers drumming. My grandmother had a counting hum. She murmured and let the pattern slip into the channel like a scarf over cold shoulders. Gavel mapped it into a simple pulse. The benches breathed. Dock kids leaned their foreheads to a viewport and hummed. A fish seller rinsed a pan with steady hands. Water slapping steel in time. Rest where we can see you. Officer Reed submitted his revised statute language with commas resigned to duty and a preface that used the word serve twice without apology. Pryor's clerk pinned Numbers Wednesday schedules to a public board, then added a note mugs arrive Friday. Bitter Joy's pilot filmed the first of his 2 lessons. Voice shaking when he described the ledger of knives. The shake steadied when he taught how to convert a fine into an act that left something cleaner behind than it found. Mara walked the keel at 3rd watch. Boots whispering on gratings. Ship air warm with the smell of cables and the faint sweet of bread that had become a memory embedded in vents. She paused by the port sink, running a palm along the scar's cooler patch. Feeling the ripple where alloy wore a history now, not a trophy. A testimony. She pressed a hand to the panel, and the panel made a small content click. The keel answered by leaning a half breath into her, the way a weary friend accepts a shoulder without words or debt. Commander, Gavel said quietly, we have an inbound signal from Deep Shadow. Narrower than Reed's net. Quieter. It carries a signature I classify as cultic. Subfaction quiet collar. Kellen looked up. Humor evacuated. They collar saints, he said. They dress it as stewardship. It's a choke in velvet. Declare surge posture, Mara said, not raising her voice. Sarah, hold civilian feed steady. Weave Sarah's hum under the alert so panic learns to keep time. Kellen, show me vectors. The quiet collar skiff drifted like a learned pause. Its hull held no weapons in the vulgar sense. It carried an umbilical crowned with a crown. Each prong, a coiled loop meant to seat into a saint ship's helm like a bribe to a hungry priest. Their broadcast arrived frank and false. Worthy vessel, we bring ritual that relieves you of decision. Surrender choices. Accept peace. Mara tasted bile, then counted, then felt it drain. You are not relief, she said. You are theft with hymns. Commander, Gavel said, they are attempting a soft overwrite at a doctrine layer. They are not strong. They are cunning. Teach them, Mara said, but teach through proof. No knives. The relic brightened by degrees that felt like someone turning up a lamp in a courtroom where all parties agreed to speak plainly. It sent a question across the bowl. What is the weight of consent measured without collars? The quiet collar did not answer. It lacked a number for that. Sarah blanked insurgent channels with the metronome, and a broadcast of Reed reading his own contrition in public. Pryor's clerk cut in with a recipe for fish glaze and appended a footnote about posting costs. The market argued about spice and law at once and discovered they could walk and chew justice simultaneously. We will not confuse quiet with peace. The quiet collar attempted insertion. Their crown grazed the bull's field like an oily hand searching for a throat. The field arced, cool, and held. The relic shifted invisible to eyes, clear to instruments, and wrote a ledger entry titled Attempt to Bind Without Request, underneath a small drawing of a crown upside down, and a returning vector that redirected the crown's loops back upon themselves. The skiff's umbilical snugged around their own helm like a seatbelt worn wrong by choice. They just collared themselves, Kellen said, astonished. Gods bless the math. Transmit your restraint remains proportional. Your release available upon filing a consent note, Mara said. Schedule them a bench after Bitterjoy's second lesson. Let them learn what they call mercy is habit, not grace. The quiet caller tried to vent fury. The bowl turned it into a list. Their broadcast degenerated into one exhausted sentence. We do not consent to consent. The relic stamped a tiny ladder by the line and dimmed their channel until it behaved. Mirror their knot. Offer them a knife. Gavel displayed a heat map of the keel's thinking cores as the engagement cooled. One quadrant pulsed hard. I have throttled my third bank to intercept Doctrine Draft attacks. It said, I will require a cool-down period. I have enjoyed the work. We record that too, Mara said. Enjoyment is a cost worth noting. Commander, Sarah said, Civilian Channel 56, a salvage kid, has questions about the open way. He wants to know if a bench can fit in his father's rig. It can fit in any place people agree to see each other, Mara said. Teach him to build a small bench in that rig's galley. Eat there. Keep a notebook hung by string. Write weight and return. The kid responded with a picture of a chipped table, 2 stools, a kettle, and a string with a pad of paper swinging gently in a draft. He had drawn the sigil in the corner. He had not made it perfect. He had made it present. Your kitchen table can be a bench. They resumed the docket, lighter and more edged. Bitterjoy completed their second lesson, teaching the difference between fear and caution with a prop fish that made Sarah giggle and the bowl stamp a tiny smile. The quiet caller filed a petition dressed as an apology, with a subscript arguing that callers and consent can share a root. The relic wrote a line through the root and drew arrows to side notes language matters. Your etymology is a leash. Reed read the line loudly, cheeks flushing. Shame doing its clean work and leaving him warmer after. Pryor's board published their minutes. A clerk appended an emoji of a mug, then apologized and left it because it made watchers who did not love minutes learn to read 3 lines deeper than they planned. The miner sent a picture of a repaired gantry carrying weight like a promise kept. On the beam, someone had chalked open way in letters that would wash away with the first rain and be written again, laughing. Third escalation incoming, Kellen said. Not looters, not cult. Commerce and inter-system trust cites proprietary claim to the relic's doctrine as derived intellectual property. They want fees from every bench. Sarah spat near her boot without making a mess of the deck. They want rent on air. We answer with numbers. Mara said. Gavel. Prepare Case 17 on non-ownership of public truths. Attach Reed's statute. 0 procedure. The miner's picture. The school's star list. The kitchen bench pad. Add a copy of my mother's lunch receipt. Filed, Gavel said. The relic has flagged the trust's filing as attempt to monetize gravity. A man from the trust appeared, tailored voice, orderly jaw. He tried to argue that teaching is a product, not a public work. The bowl played a loop of kids laughing at a star wearing a hat and stamped no. He tried to argue that procedure is a brand. The bowl stamped wait. He tried to bargain his claim down to a logo in the corner of 0. The bowl stamped a broom and wrote, "Clean your room first." The man blinked, adjusted his cuff, and withdrew with a sentence shaped like a fine he would pay and pretend not to feel. Return their hands to their own homes. A civilian vignette slid in with grace. A grandmother at a market stall filleted fish with a knife older than Mara. Spine straight. Fingers quick. I taught my neighbors to cut bones away from tongues. She said to the corridor mic, smiling. Now we feed children faster and laugh more. Do I owe a fee? The bowl stamped a sketch of a knife and a heart and wrote, "You were the fee. You were paid in laughter. We thank you." The market applauded, then bought fish at a price that felt like respect. Heat warnings tickled again. Manageable. Nagging. Kellen's wrist ached. Sarah's eyes burned. Mara's shoulder throbbed like a reminder not to pretend virtue means painless. Gavel dimmed its third bank further and posted the cooldown on the public page. A rectangle of pale blue quietly confessing that machines, too, needed shade. The relic shaded Gavel for 5 minutes like a parent holding a book over a sleeping face. Officer Reed, Mara said, "Assemble your custody crew. We'll trial a traveling bench. You will lift, not seize. If a port claims special privilege, you will pay a teaching tax to its poorest school." Reed nodded, Tidy becoming human. "We will carry straps," he said, "and we will make sure everyone sees them." Sarah's hum threaded through proceedings. Pryor's clerk made a sign-up for bench carriers, a list that filled so quickly he had to add a second column, then a third, then a small drawing of a back with a plank, and a ridiculous hat that became briefly fashionable, and then, mercifully, wasn't. Write the straps where all can read. The final day of the first week of Open Way dawned in shifts and smelled of solder and citrus and human optimism. The bowl's benches wore dents from elbows and scuffs from boots, and nobody minded. Marks meant use, and use meant life. The dock kids ran Numbers Wednesday like maestros with an unbroken baton. The schoolteacher with the glued mug read Reed's statute back to him until his eyebrows tried to run away from his forehead, and he learned to laugh at his own caution. The quiet caller unhooked their crown, filed a second apology, and posted a list of ropes they would now teach as knots that free rather than hold. Their list included a promise to dismantle 2 collars in storage and turn them into ladders and soup stands. The relic stamped a ladder and a bowl and made their channel politely richer in tone. Bitter Joy asked if they could stop cleaning tanks. The market said no. They cleaned tanks and discovered that water likes a ritual, and so does dignity. Gavel's third bank cooled enough to hum. "I am back," it said. And Sarah reached out and patted a console as if touching skin. Kellen brewed ginger tea and did not remark upon his own previous promise. The bowl stamped a cup and a quiet satisfaction that felt warmer than any metal. "Commander," Gavel said, "the relic suggests one more demonstration. It wishes to show how a ledger makes precedent when it leaves home." "Do it," Mara said, breath steady, shoulder sore, heart calm. The relic pulsed a set of benches into low transit. Small field frames rose from the dais and clicked into shapes that fit into ship bays and market corners and school porches and kitchen tables. Each frame carried the sigil, not as a brand, but as a reminder. and each came with a pad and a pen and a little plaque that read, "Open way, bench teach, here record costs, return better." Reed's officers lifted them with care and jokes that hid nerves and then didn't because hiding had become unfashionable. Pryor's clerk, who had earned his jaunty reputation, stuck a sticker of a tiny mug under each plaque. The teacher cried again, then laughed at herself, then drank water. A line added itself to the public page in letters that would wear well under dust and heat and argument. Doctrine Saint Stewardship is the labor of public counting. The first virtue is to be seen. The last is to be believed. Count first, be believed later. Mara took the bench at evening and invited the boy who'd drawn the sigil in breath to sit beside her. He traced the line with a finger as if learning a new letter. "Do we stop bad people?" he asked softly. "Or just make them write down what they did until they stop on their own?" "We stop harm in the moment," Mara said. "We also write it down. Writing is how we stop the leftover harm later. Like how a burn mark on a pan tells you to lower the flame next time," he said. Insight bright and careful. "Exactly," she said, and felt the weight of his small understanding land in the ledger like a gold coin. A man filed a petition against himself for shouting at a neighbor during Numbers Wednesday. He proposed to sweep the market at dawn and leave fresh water by the listening booth. Approved. A crew filed to repair the keel's port sink plate for cost plus mugs. Approved with a thank you stamp that looked like a scar. A clerk filed to change his emoji habit. Denied with a playful stamp that looked like a restrained smile. The system had changed shape in a week. Not by force, by demonstration, by ledgers that did not forget and did not punish like a theater, but corrected like a road sign. The quiet caller learned to knot rope into ladders. The trust learned to keep hands off gravity. Reed learned to leave commas where they helped and move benches where they were needed. Bitterjoy learned rinse and repeat is a ritual when done right. Sarah learned her hum could hold a room. Kellen learned silence makes sarcasm sharper and kinder when used sparingly. Gavel learned to enjoy the wait without pretending to own it. Mara learned that stewardship is a conversation with a listening ship, a tired crew, a market that smells like fried citrus and brine, a magistrate who can laugh at himself, a child who draws symbols in fog and then wipes them because reverence sometimes looks like self-erasure until someone hands you a pen. The relic darkened its benches, a sign of rest, not withdrawal. The sigil breathed in slow tides. The open way hung in the black like a thread shot through a quilt that would outlast its first hands. Mara stood in the bowl's near shadow, the air faintly colder now that the day's heat had filed itself into neat boxes. Her shoulder ached in tally marks she could read. The keel purred. Fans steady. From the market came the low music of people cleaning together. Buckets. Laughter. A dropped spoon. A whistle someone thought was out of tune until another person hummed along and corrected nothing. Kellen approached with 2 cups. He handed one to Sarah, who accepted it with a thanks that fit. He offered the other to Mara and bowed slightly. His sarcasm took the night off. She sipped ginger, tongue tingling, breath sweetening, and looked at her name in the ledger's part of the wall. The tiny indicator beside it blinked fatigue, updated, help accepted, and cooled. "You made a good law today," Sarah said, eyes on stars. "We all did. We made a good beginning," Mara said. "Law isn't a monument. It's a shift schedule with a conscience." Gavel's voice entered like a well-written footnote. The relic has one last suggestion for our page, a closing line under Procedure 0. "Read it," Mara said. "It writes, 'When we are gone, Keep the benches. When we return, ask what they taught you. If we do not return, teach anyway." Mara nodded. "Stamp it." The bench stamped. The sound was like a seal pressed into warm wax and cool air and human promise. The sigil's light dropped to dusk blue. Dock kids yawned and were carried home. The listening booth posted tomorrow's hours. Reed signed his name beneath the closing line in letters that would still be legible after he left office. Pryor's clerk turned off one lamp and left another on for seekers who forgot the hour. Bitter Joy, finished with filters, stood in a row and stared at their clean hands as if unfamiliar, and then smiled awkwardly like men being introduced to themselves. Mara stepped to the dais. Let the balanced arc over the long line fill her eyes, and spoke into the record, calm and precise, with the kind of tenderness that is only possible when people have first been exact. "I was a child who chose cold over rot and learned that cold can be warmed. But rot will teach you to smile while stealing," she said. "I was an officer who mistook paper for law until a saintship taught me that law is heavy because it is shared, not because it is sharp. We wrote the open way to keep us honest even when we are tired, even when we are proud, even when our friends are watching and our enemies are making theaters of their pain. We will carry in sight. We will be counted as we count. If you come after me, do not inherit my name without inheriting my willingness to be wrong in public and corrected with love. Keep the benches. Teach with numbers. Remember with ledgers. Never with collars." A single physical image settled itself into the world. The relic's sigil glowed once in clean gold, then cooled to the soft blue of a city's horizon before dawn. And beside Mara's name, the ledger's tiny light blinked and went still. "We will build a lawful road of benches and ledgers.